We are back. Once again, it's on with the Black Comic Lords as we continue our Black Comic Creators series of interviews that we've been doing all year. We have been busy. Brother's kind of tired, but I'm amped because this particular interview is with a is it okay to call him a veteran in the game at this point? Yeah, I mean a veteran in the game, Evan Narcisse, and a new up and coming hot artist by the name of Charles Stewart III, as we talk about their book, Static Team Up Anansi. Now, if you have any history of watching us on the Black Comic Lords on this channel, you know that the Milestone comics are near and dear to our hearts. Static is probably one of the most popular comic book superheroes in our space. And for me personally, I'm a big fan of Anansi. You know, the mythology behind the West African god Anansi. And so that's what this book is going to be about. So we're going to talk to these two individuals. For those of you who may not remember or don't know, Evan Narcisse is a journalist, video game narrative designer, and comic book writer whose current work includes the Waller versus Wildstorm series and Milestone's upcoming Static Team Up Anansi. His other noteworthy works include Batman, Gothic Nights, Gilded City, which was a dope book, by the way, Wakanda, Rise of the Black Panther, which, if you're a Black Panther fan, you need to have that, and Wakanda. Charles Stewart III is an artist from Minneapolis, Minnesota, who received his BFA in comic art and illustration in 2011 from the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. He's worked for Heritage Comics from 2009 and 2012, where he illustrated both cover and interior art. He's also worked for Youth Art and Media Works from 2011 to 2012, where he was responsible for comic book design and illustrations. Charles is also a member of the historic inaugural class of the Milestone Initiative. So with that, I'd like to welcome and greet Evan Narcisse and Charles Stewart III.
Hey,
So,
hey, all. Hey,
how
Paul.
you guys
Glad to be
doing?
back.
Oh, we're happy to have you. Very happy to have you. Charles, you're new to this. So hold on, let me move this around here. There we go. So let me start with you, Charles. How did you discover comics?
I mean, I have to give you a short answer because, like, to give you the full answer is like way too long for this interview. It does start with my parents, or specifically my dad. My dad was definitely into, like, collecting comics. Nothing like super, OP or anything, but just like, here and there, like things like X-Men, Spider-Man, whatnot. But I think my introduction into comics honestly came more through animation. Like, I love, like, the whole the Timverse of animation, like, Batman the animated series, Justice League, all that stuff. And then that translated into my love of those characters into, you know what? I went to art school. I went to both like a high school for the performing arts and then college. And because I love drawing so much and I love the medium of comics, it directed me to like wanting to actually read that. It's like, hey, I like to draw. I like superheroes. Why not read comics?
Right. What about you, Evan?
I mean, gosh, I learned to read off comics basically. um, uh, comics have always been a part of my life. My earliest memories revolve around some of the biggest superhero icons in the world, from the big two at least, Spider-Man, Superman, and it's funny. Paul, if correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we share Caribbean heritage in common.
Yeah. Right.
And when your parents don't grow up here and aren't exposed to at least the paradigm of the American comic book marketplace, my mom was very, very much disinclined to let me read comics. She was like, "Nah, this is kid stuff." And when I started to get older, in my high school years, where a lot of people fall off, I didn't, and she was convinced this was like a sign of slothfulness on my part, and she threw away a bunch of my comics. And if you've had that happen to you, it still hurts.
Oh,
That said, you know, I never fell away from comics. You know, I read them through college and after, and watched the medium grow and expand. So yeah, it's a lifelong relationship, and now I'm lucky enough to be a creator.
so for and this is questions for both of you. What was the catalyst that inspired you to move from being a comics consumer to a comics maker?
Charles, you go first.
Okay, all right, let's just go back and forth. Yeah. I think for me, it was a couple of factors because, like I said, I actually went to Duke Ellington School of the Arts in DC, so same school that Dave Chappelle came from, and a couple other colleagues noted throughout the entertainment industry. But basically, I ended up figuring that, okay, I like drawing a lot. That was always a passion of mine. I like comics. Is there a point where this like can converge together and actually meet up? And I didn't know like what a career would look like, but you know, several years later, after into my college career up in MCAD, I started running into people talking about, oh yeah, this is like how you kind of make your steps into the industry, or at least if you want to go that direction. And again, at the time, I never thought it would like fully be possible. I just saw like inklings of it. And then I think the thing that really blew off the door is like when I actually, I think it was like the end of my college career, like I was introduced to from one of my professors to Patrick Gleason, who is like to this day I consider like one of my best mentors. You know, he used to work for DC Comics over 20 years. Now he's at Marvel. But like just seeing his life, it's like, yeah, I've had like a 20-year career with comics, and like I'll show you kind of what it looks like to build a portfolio. Nothing's guaranteed. Nothing is owed. Nothing is guaranteed in this industry. But if you work hard enough, it'll really show. And so I think that's what he taught me. And so I think that's kind of what kind of clicked to me. It's like, yeah, I really want to go headlong. I want to pursue this. I don't know if it'll even happen, but I'm gonna try it because I was that in love with it.
Evan?
My way in is kind of atypical. The first part of my professional career was in journalism and criticism, right? So I focused on nerd culture stuff, so superheroes, comic books. I was a video game journalist and critic for a long time. So, just basically writing about the stuff I love, trying to unpack it and tell people about works that I found interesting or creators I thought were meaningful. So I was doing that for a long time. And, I used to write for Kotaku and IO9. And during the course of those years, I guess it was 2016 when Ta-Nehisi started writing the main Black Panther title for Marvel. I'm lucky enough to call him a friend, and we reconnected over that. T'Challa always being my favorite character. Anyway, I'd written a number of pieces about Black Panther over the years, and an editor at Marvel noticed that and asked Ta-Nehisi if I would be willing to write some Black Panther comics, and that project turned into Rise of the Black Panther, and that's how I found my way in. And
I love how you just sort of just matter of factly, yeah, just if I wanted to work on a few Black Panther comics. I mean, you wrote this seminal run, which I, as a hardcore, Black Panther is my favorite character, and that's the largest part of my collection in terms of what's important to me. And you just like, yeah, give yourself some props.
Well, thanks. I'm also not trying to have the Warner Brothers snipers target me, since we're supposed to be talking about DC Comics stuff now. You're
gonna get me in trouble. I'm gonna get myself in trouble. All right, please continue.
Yeah. So like, it's funny because there are people who've had similar journeys to me, where you go from journalism and criticism and into the media that you used to write about. For me, it was never planned, right? Like this was happenstance, right? And right place, right time, all that stuff. So this was not something like where I was like, so when I get to write T'Challa one day, or when I get to write Static one day, I'm going to do this. I never had like grand schemes like that. So I just try to, be grateful and humble about where I find myself. And, I've gotten to write some of my favorite characters, among them the Milestone characters. So, I know what they meant to me, and I'm just trying to like be a bridge and open up that portal into like the horizon of Black superhero characters, Milestone characters, and have other people hopefully enjoy it the way I did when I was first encountering them.
Yeah, one of the best quotes I remember from the last time we spoke that you said was it's almost a hashtag. Milestone made me.
Oh
You
yeah.
know, the significance of Milestone was for you as a child. I think you said that you had visited the Milestone offices and got to meet a lot of those creators back in the day.
Yeah. So I mean, really quick, Milestone came out when I was in college, and it blew me away. I was lucky enough to go to their offices a few times. I applied for an internship. I'll never forget. Dennis Cowan asked me if I was okay sweeping floors. I thought he was joking. I was like, "You serious?" Turns out he was serious, and I didn't get the internship, but it's all good. But yeah. So Milestone like really changed what I thought was possible in terms of storytelling, world building, representation of Black culture and multicultural experiences.
Right.
I still think those works stand the test of time. And Milestone did make me like I there was a whole new horizon that was that felt possible to me. So yeah.
Absolutely. I think a lot of what we're experiencing now in comics is in large part due to what Milestone did 30 years ago. Speaking of Milestone, Charles, you were part of the inaugural class for the
Yes.
Milestone Initiative. Look at all those bright, shiny faces.
I know, yeah, especially right here.
There's you right there on the bottom row.
Yeah.
What was that like? What was that experience like?
To be honest, it was very surreal. I mean, you could ask any one of us who are part of that program, and we would say pretty much the exact same thing. Like, it was a dream come true. I'll never forget, like, the minute, like, they did, like, the final Zoom call for, oh, yeah, we got in. It kind of took us off by surprise. I think I acted, like, a little less surprised than I thought it was because, like, literally it was, like, a video of, like, Cowan. Dennis Cowan says, like, congratulations, you made it. And I was just, like, I just started smiling. I was like, wait, this is it? Because they put some subterfuge in there as like, oh, we got to do one more final interview. It was just a video of him saying you made it in. I was like, awesome. I just lifted my black fist up just a little bit. Like, but yeah, I think overall the program was very much a needed thing for us as well to not just feel validated, but also kind of get prepped up for what's to come. Because ultimately it was a 10-week program to get us a little more training. I mean, obviously a lot of us like had different backgrounds in like training, like formally and whatnot, but I think to have like professional writers and artists and mentors to help us to train to see what it looks like to create and be a part of this industry on a professional level. That's what that program was. And honestly, it was a dream come true, like to be able to have peers to like, do lessons and critique each other's works and just like bounce things back. I mean, you don't get that on a consistent basis in the industry as well either. So it's like, it was very concentrated and centralized for that 10-week program. And it was great. And then obviously the summit, it was amazing just being able to meet all the executives there, being able to meet Jim Lee, Cowan, Hudlin in person. It was the conversations, the laughs that we had, like, it's amazing. And for those who are able to see like the documentary, which also Evan, I think, had a hand in making as well, on Max. That whole thing like only captures like, I guess, a tenth of what we experienced there. It was tremendous. Like, words can't really explain, but it was a very beautiful experience, and I think it's really going to affect the rest of us for however long our careers continue in comics.
What was your first DC gig after graduating from the Milestone Initiative?
Well, you'll find out next month, or yeah, actually this month on the 13th. So basically, the book that me and Evan got a chance to work on. Actually, take that back. You said what was there after the inaugural thing? Technically, This.
Nice.
My first 8-page credited story for DC Comics in this New Talent Initiative anthology.
Let me see what that is. Yeah, that comes out what, in a few weeks?
No, it actually comes out in a couple of days.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, the 6th. The 6th of this month. And this cover especially was a very unique cover because like all 12 artists were able to pick one character to design. So basically, my editor Marquise Draper, he basically contacted each one of the artists to give them a character to design, And this whole layout was done by Dennis Cowan. And then like each artist had different characters to do. I had the lucky opportunity to do static. And yeah, he just said, go wild with it.
That's crazy. I didn't, you know what? I was looking at that same cover several days ago, and I really couldn't figure out whose art it was, because there were some parts of it where I was like, that really kind of looks like Dennis's pencils. But then I saw some other parts, like the rocket part looks really much like Crisscross. And I'm like, it's not Crisscross, it's not Dennis, but I just, it looks like both of them together. Just, I couldn't place it. And for you to tell me that it was like all 12, so all 12 from the Milestone Initiative.
12 of us each one of us got to design each character.
That's phenomenal, because you guys are all rising stars. That book is that cover is going to be very significant someday.
Yeah, I credit the design of like a Cowan for the initial layout, but also to the colorists who colored everything, because I think that would really blended everything to like just look cohesive versus just like all over the place. Because we all have like, I'm gonna say wildly different styles, but very unique different styles in art.
Well, let's get into why we're here tonight, which is this static book where he teams up with Anansi, which is a character that's near and dear to my heart. Let's talk about the origins of this character. I mean, this team up originally occurred, for those who don't know, because especially if you're on the younger side of things, you may not be familiar with the Static Shock cartoon, but for all intents and purposes, and Evan, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this. This was born out of I think it's Static Shock season 3. Episode 3 and episode 3 of season 4 is where Anansi shows up in the Static Shock cartoon, right?
Yes, Static in Africa was the first episode, I believe. Yeah, and I think that's season 3. Yeah.
What's interesting is this episode, Static in Africa, aired on February 8th of 2003, and it had voice work from the great Roscoe Lee Brown, Shakespearean actor Carl Lumley, who's a legend, who's actually on a short-lived series called Mantis. Tremendous actor, and everyone's favorite fan cast for every superhero imaginable, Michael Jai White. Great list of character actors for this episode.
And of course, Phil Lamar holding it down as Virgil Hawkins.
And Phil Lamar holding it down as Virgil Hawkins. Whose idea was it to bring Anansi into the Milestone Comics universe?
Yeah, so if I recall correctly, it all started from when Nicholas Draper Ivey, who's the co-creator on the current Static series and artist extraordinaire, he drew a sketch of Anansi inspired by the cartoon version, the Static Shock cartoon version of the character, and put on his Instagram. Everything that Nick does gets like thousands, millions of likes because he's dope like that. And I think, probably during one of the regular editorial calls, and if you want to watch those original episodes, Static Shock is still on Max, so go watch it. But so Nick drew this version of the character, and Reginald Hudlin and Dennis Cohen, who are like the nucleus of the current iteration of Milestone,
right?
We're like, hey, why don't we use this rendition to introduce Anansi into the comics, because he's never in the comics, in the Milestone comics. So they decided on that, and then I got a email from I believe it was Marquise Draper and probably Chris Conroy too, 2 editors at DC, who were like, hey, would you like to do the honors of writing this story? So I said yes. And then, we're off to the races. They said that Charles was going to be the artist, and I was so happy about that because, I think the great thing about the Milestone Initiative is like, it is one of the most full kind of manifestations of the Milestone promise, right? Which is like, onboarding talent from marginalized communities, right? And the list of talent that's come through the original iteration of Milestone is like legendary. Like Humberto Ramos, first comic was Milestone. The late John Paul Leon, original artist in the Static run from the 90s, Milestone. And the list goes on and on, right? So
Right.
the fact that these new creators have like an institutionalized program to learn about how to make comics is great. So when they told me Charles was going to be drawing it, I felt like so really happy. And then pages started to come in, and boy, let me tell you, this dude worked his ass off to make every page sing. So that's how it all started.
Dude, what was the time frame of all that? Do you know?
I think I got the first email from Narcisse and Chris early this year, maybe late last year. I don't remember, because the emails for that and the Milestone 30th anniversary special are kind of running together in my brain. But like, yeah, I will say early this year.
So here's why I asked about that time frame. You worked on the Milestone 30th anniversary issue with Chris Cross.
That's right, yeah.
And we interviewed you like earlier this year on that. We had interviewed a few of the Milestone artists, including we were part of the roundtable discussion with Nicholas Draper Ivey. So, you know, I wrote some of the questions for that roundtable discussion. And after it was done, I was like, I forgot to ask Nicholas Draper Ivey about Anansi. Now, remember I said this episode from Static Shock aired on February 8th of 2003. I sent out this this tweet. Let me see if I can make it a little bigger. So I sent out this tweet February 6th, 2 days before the 20-year anniversary of that episode airing. The one character we forgot to ask Nicholas Draper about in our interview was Anansi. So then Michael Schelling, DC, sends out this meme. This dog snickering. Nicholas Draper Ivey's reaction is ha 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 ha. So I respond, we won't be mad if you and Vita squeeze Anansi into an issue somewhere. I'm just saying. Marquise Draper just does the coy, you know.
Stephen A.
I know
that's not just any dog, Paul. That's Snidely. Muttley.
Snidely
from Wacky Races. Yeah.
Right.
But yeah,
so like, all these guys knew in February something was coming down the pike.
Your Anansi sense was tingling.
My Anansi sense was tingling. I can't say I claim credit for it, but certainly I was tuned into the Milestone universe on a metaphysical level. Anyway, so let me go to this this next thing we have here. Let's talk about why this character is so important. So we have the definition of sort of the background of Anansi. Anansi or Anansi, Kwaku Anansi or Nasi, a Khan folk tale character popular in West Africa and the Caribbean. Anansi means spider, and tales of Anansi originate from the Ashanti in Ghana. Anansi is present in several novels, collections, series, video games, and comic books. So, Evan, this is a question for you. Who is Anansi, and why is he such an important figure?
Are we talking about the Milestone comic book iteration of him?
No. The actual.
Oh yeah, so the Akan folkloric figure. Yeah, so Anansi is a trickster god, and he might be the most preeminent idea of a trickster, preeminent version of a trickster character, for at least within Black diasporan culture. And by trickster, that means he is sometimes an anti-hero, antagonist. He's somebody who runs against the grain of social norms to reveal knowledge that sometimes those in power or those opposed to each other may not necessarily want to be revealed, right? So some of his folk tales are stuff like, he's stealing lightning from the thunder god or something like that, or he's tricking a character with wings to give him his wings, and that's why this bird doesn't have wings. So like a lot of mythology, his stories are used to explain the state of the world, but he's not somebody who you would say is traditionally heroic in the way a lot of mythological protagonists are, where like he's noble and upstanding, and he is virtuous, and he kind of pursues his aims in those ways. No, he's a guy who will lie, cheat, steal, make fun of people, just be mad shady. But ultimately, those characteristics show you the order of the world and insights into people and processes that you wouldn't necessarily ordinarily have.
Yeah, I mean,
okay, Professor Paul, you gonna do I get a grade on that? You put me on the spot.
No, that was a textbook answer, man. That was perfect. One of the things that you noted before is you and I both are from Caribbean heritage. You Haitian, I'm Jamaican. My first knowledge of Anansi came from books my parents gave me when I was a kid from Jamaica. And there were just books that were called Anansis. Like in our culture, you have these fairy tales that are just called Anansis, and we just knew them as fables, stories that had some type of moral ending with this character that was in it. It's always someone's getting into some type of peril because of a choice made, but at the end of the day, there's some type of moral lesson. And so I had these books as a kid called Anansis, and that's all I knew as a kid. It wasn't until I adult that I, in later studying things, they're like, yeah, this character called Anansi and is related to folklore, and I connected the two together. So I've always been fascinated with the character ever since for quite some time. And I always go out of my way to try and collect as many copies of him in comic books as I can. So to that point, I want to take a look at just some of the inklings of him throughout comic book culture, starting, of course, with DC. Here's Anansi meeting Vixen in Justice League.
Written by Dwayne McDuffie, Milestone co-founder.
Absolutely. Amazing Spider-Man. This is the first instance Marvel did it. J. Michael Straczynski, Kaku Anansi, and they did that weird, interesting story in this Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man story where they didn't introduce the character, but they actually introduced the fact that there was an Anansi temple in Wakanda, which I thought would have been interesting to explore at some point. And they have this Spider-Man fairy tales, which I won't say anything because this dude's Miles Morales movie just came out, but really that's where his power should come from. But I'm not going to talk about that. So in the independent world, we have Black AF, Widows and Orphans in that book. Excellent book. Recently, Jim Henson, the storyteller, tricksters storyline. He's well represented in independent books as well. Tristan Strong, Is Nana by Greg. Shout out to Greg Anderson Elisi. Excellent book. Shout out to Rodney Barnes. Up for an Eisner. Hope he wins. Philadelphia, Anita Hawes with his portrayal of Anansi. But this is the one that we're here to talk about tonight. You guys have some dope covers on this book.
You ain't lying.
I mean,
yeah, no, it's they're incredible. Like, I was lucky enough to work with Natasha Bustos on the Wakanda miniseries backup, History of the Black Panthers, and like, I think Natasha's talent is just incredible. Like, one of those artists who have amazing design sense and draftsmanship, and I think she did something that only she can do. That cover is incredible, the one in the middle. And of course, Nick is doing his thing, that amazing composition, playing with the shadow and the light, which thematically works in our story. Yeah, and the third cover, which
Edwin Galman.
Yeah, just is such an amazing piece of like turning the meta text into the text, where all these different versions of Anansi are coexisting, and the fact that this is a character that's manifested in different iterations for centuries, like just seems to kind of like breathe out of that cover. It's amazing. Yeah, we got lucky on this one.
Now, Charles, did you do your interiors before these covers were done, or did you get the covers?
No, I believe these covers were done before the interiors, because like I remember when they announced it, like I was going to be doing the book itself. I just remember like articles already put out there with images. It's like, oh man, it kind of made me feel.
So let me get it straight. You just got out of the Milestone Initiative. They give you this gig, say, hey, you're going to do Static. You're like, cool, Static. He's one of the most popular characters Milestone's ever made. Here's the covers of Nicholas Draper Ivy, Natasha Bustos, and Edwin Galman. And this is what you have to, like, no pressure. Did you feel any pressure whatsoever?
I'll just say this, and I hope no one takes this like an arrogant way, but no. And the reason why is because I like every single art style that I see in these covers, but that's not my art style. So I feel like I didn't have to compete to that. I just needed to compete to like the quality of myself for storytelling, because like, honestly, that's the kind of stuff that I like being a part of. It's kind of like being a cipher. It's like, okay, everyone's got their own rap styles, their own ways of like, spin their lyricism. I'm just going to come with mine. I want to add to the pot. And so that's really what I felt. I was like, okay, bet, let's do this.
I absolutely love that answer. That's the perfect answer. You got some swag, man. Are you from Miami? No,
nah.
I'm just kidding. All right, so let's talk about your take on this character, because we've seen these 3 takes by these 3 fantastic artists. Let's look at your take. We saw the original version in the cartoon. What distinctions did you make to make this character design your own? What did you do?
Okay. Yeah. So I think there are 3 elements that I could point to on here. If you're looking at this first page, that
I know one that I immediately strikes out at me that I'll talk about, but go ahead.
Oh, really? All right. Well, actually, there's technically, I guess, like 4 things, but one of them, and it's probably the most obvious thing, is his staff. That's it. And I'll talk about that because that's the most obvious thing. When I started coming up with just sketches of, okay, let me like get in the rhythm of like practicing drawing this character, because I know what he looks like, but I want to get into the rhythm of like how I just draw with ease. One of the things I thought about was like his staff. So like the previous slide that had like the different covers, and I think it was like the 3rd one in the animated series, his original staff just looks like a staff. It's like wood. I think it has like a little bandage wrapped around there, and I think a little leaf imprint. I was like, okay, that was cool. But one of the things I thought about as I was kind of going through my head, I was like, okay, I need to ask Evan if this is okay, and even Narcisse. Hey, is it cool if I like change like the staff design a little bit? And the reason why is because when I think about anything that you see, for instance, like if it's like a batarang that Batman has, it's very distinct. And I wanted the staff to come off as like distinctly African design. Because I remember when my dad was in the military, like he was stationed in Saudi Arabia for a year or so. And I remember he came back home with like this staff, and it was obviously like a Saudi staff, but it was basically like of a snake, of like a cobra. And it just looked really cool to design. It wasn't just like a simple stick. And when I thought about, okay, if this staff like kind of had like more of an African feel, how would it look like? So I basically went on Pinterest, I Googled a bunch of things like African staff, and there's some beautiful like handcrafted, sculpted, staffs out there. I was like, yo, like I want to see that more. Like when I think about like, weapons that people have, they need to look distinct. They need to look fun. They need to look like something that, I can purchase that offline for like a cosplay. So that's something I really wanted to focus on. Is like, minute as that detail may seem to someone who's reading it, it's like, I wanted that to come off as like very distinctual and African feeling, if that makes sense.
Now you mentioned there were several elements. What are some other ones that you did?
Yeah, second one is like both his I guess armbands and on his like legs.
Legs. Yeah.
His wraps that I noticed, like they're just kind of like wraps like in like the comics, but I wanted them to have kind of more of like, again, a weave pattern, because when I think about like African basket weaves, I wanted it to feel like something that's like more like handcrafted. Same thing with the staff. And then the third one is his belt. You can't really see it in a lot of shots, but like I guess in the second panel right here, I wanted to have like, again, more of like an African textile like geometric design, because when I think about African belts, like they have like a very like, you know, ornate like a geometric shape. And then obviously the last thing, which to no surprise, if you look at the third panel, is the symbol on the back. The reason why I wanted to do that is because in my artist brain, when I think about, you know, the geography of like any costume, like when you think about like, okay, Spider-Man, like he has like a belt, but it wraps around the back, but then it doesn't connect on the back, it connects on the front. You have to think of some of those things, like what is it going to look like from every angle. And when I thought about the series, in the animated series, I couldn't place it in my head if I actually saw a moment where Anansi flipped upside down, he saw his back with his cape up. So I was like, okay, well, what's under there? And I asked them, like, hey, it's like, hey, Evan, like, is there anything on the back of his back? It's like, go up, have at it. And so I did. I was like, okay, let's continue that pattern from around like the, I guess the red drapes, whatever it is, that come around to his backside. I wanted to come up and I really wanted to form into a spider, but again, a very African textile geometric shape that, again, doesn't look like too close to anything we see like with Spider-Man comics or anything, but something that's more unique to his design.
I love the thought that you put into this. I could see your ideas, hopefully, God willing, they make a live action version of this someday. And I really hope they incorporate the thoughtfulness you put into these designs. I everything that you mentioned is stuff that I also noticed, and I wanted you to talk about it and explain that, because I absolutely thought this design is fantastic. You can see the level of detail and thought that went into it, and my hat's off to you for that.
I appreciate it. I hopefully don't get pegged as a slow artist one day, but like I literally think about like all my favorite artists, like Steve McNiven and like Travis Charest, like they're slow artists, but for good reason, because they put good quality in their work. So it's like,
yeah,
that's like, me personally, I struggle with that because I want to like have every panel mean something, or at least be visually attractive.
Well, you know, I've learned that, you know, at the evolution of the comic book artist, with the growing pattern these days is to get into cover art. You know, I'm doing a lot of cover art, and those deadlines about being slow becomes less important because of the amount of detail you put into those cover art. So that's probably where your future may be. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about it. This is fantastic artwork. One of the questions that Frustrated Fan Show asked earlier was mentioned something about in the show, wasn't there a real spider attached to him for his power? He also mentioned about the costume being a conduit for his power. So next question's for you, Evan. What is where did his powers come from? What are Nancy's powers, and where they come from?
Well, to answer the question about the show, yeah, there was a spider totem. I want to say a golden spider totem in the second episode Anansi appears in. That basically was a conduit for his powers. You know, without spoiling too much here, you know, Anansi, this version of Anansi in the Milestone Comics universe in 2023 is much like the historical and folkloric version. He's a storyteller, right? He is somebody who's tapped into the power of story. So in the comic, we call him a griomancer and a quantum conjurer. And basically, if he tells you a story in a way that gets you to believe it, he can manipulate your reality, what you perceive, what you experience, and even where you are. So, you know, with the right audience and the right affect and theatricality, he can do magic, basically, right? He can reorder the world through story, and you know that's very much intentional on my part, on our part, because you know all of us are vessels for stories, right? Like the things that we've experienced individually, the things that our families impart onto us, our culture, our society, our lineages and ancestrally, all that stuff is a story, right? Who are you? Where do you belong? What do you do? And Anansi can tap into that stuff. One of the conceits that we put forth in the book is, there's a ethereal, immaterial web of stories that connects everything in the world. And guess who can see it? Guess who can touch it and pluck those strings and move things around? Your boy Anansi. So that's very much the premise of this version of the character.
He also seems to be very agile. You look at that third panel. Does he have some type of enhanced physical abilities, you think?
Look, he can do what needs to get done to do the job. All right, Paul. Like, he's not asking you where you went to school. Like, he let our boy be a man of mystery, which is very much the intent here. Like, you're not going to get every question answered about this version of Anansi, and that's very much by design. We want the reader to be interested in this version of the character, and where he fits in the Milestone universe. So certain things are going to be unanswered, but hopefully there'll be enough there to want you to see more.
Well, let's roll with that. Let's focus on one of the things that you mentioned. You mentioned the power of telling stories, which it's important because that's a large part of his background in folklore, but it's also a large part of our history, right? The oral tradition, and how that has given us the ability to still maintain these ties despite everything us generationally have gone through. The ability to still tap into a lot of that culture through that oral tradition. I pulled out these two quotes because of what you just said. I thought it was really dope and deep. What is magic but a story told to reorder the world? And stories began in the motherland of all humanity, did they not? I had to reread that probably about 3 times because you kind of hit me kind of hard with that, because you had me thinking. And then you think about the context of who Anansi is, and you think about the history of the oral tradition, and then you put that in a speculative fiction setting, right? And you think about, because in comics and science fiction and stuff, we have the ideas that thought can change reality. That's sort of your fifth dimension, right? The idea of thought. And if story can be used to change perceptions, and perceptions is thought, and thought alters reality, his powers are they can be almost anything. So I love the way that you phrased that, and the fact that you've kind of left open the door in this book for the next time he appears for someone to run with that concept. So I thought that was really cool.
Thank you.
Let's move on. Evan, I don't want to do spoilers, but why don't you give us the premise of what this book is about?
Well, broadly speaking, staying on the meta theme of story, the emergence of bag babies and the incident of the Big Bang in the Milestone universe, is a new chapter in the story of humanity, right? And as such, Anansi is concerned about who these bang babies are and what's happening to them, what stories will come out of their existence, right? And how it might shape and change the fate of all humanity. Incidents happen in the story where other people are realizing the importance of bang babies, and that brings in Static, who then meets Anansi, and they work together to resolve the problem that happens in the plot. But again, staying on the meta, it's the fact that bang babies are, we'd call them metahumans, right? And realistic science-based terminology. But in another age, they might have been worshipped, they might have been feared. and Anansi recognizes that, and that idea very much informs the plot and the interactions between Static and Anansi. So it's a way again of like really tapping into the promise of Milestone Media, which is that heroism can come in all shapes and sizes, colors, and walks of life, right? And he recognizes that. And the existence of marginalized people with world-shattering abilities is a quantum shift from how we usually see these ideas roll out in characters and protagonists in speculative fiction. So, like, Anansi is very much tapped into the meta of it all, where he's like, yeah, something huge is going on here, and as a guardian of story, it's my job to be part of this.
Yeah, I mean, Milestone, the original.
I'm tap dancing over here trying to be vague, but yeah.
No, you're doing great. Because as I said, I don't want to spoil the story because it's a really great story. But you do touch upon some things that really made me think, which I think is good storytelling and what it's supposed to do. The original Milestone didn't have a lot of mysticism in it. You had Kwai in Blood Syndicate. You had Zombie
Fox. Yeah, you had Zombie. Yeah.
But the majority of the characters really were bang babies. I mean, Rocket got her power from the belt of Icons and Alien, but for the most part, most other people were just not on the mystical side of things. So I love to see Milestone expanding into other realms of this type of genre. So I'm excited about what he brings to the table. And I would be remiss if, as we talk about storytelling, we don't acknowledge the storytelling that Charles did on this splash page. I had to look really close. Like, did you borrow bits and pieces from other comics? I saw here in the upper right-hand corner, that's one from the Icon and Rocket. But did you added some of your own stuff here too, didn't you?
No, actually, these were all borrowed. And the reason why, because I actually reached out to Narcisse, our editor, to specifically say, hey, listen, on a realistic level, I could draw like different stuff, but I want to make sure we get this deadline. That was the biggest reason. But also, I feel like for me, I have no problem with like having, as long as it's okay with like, from the editor side of things, adding other artwork from like other issues and other books. Because for me, what I think about is like in a world where we read like, DC comics, like, and we read like faithfully like one specific book, and it makes reference to another event that happened over another book, and say we want to check that out, and then we have that cross reference. I feel like it's one of those things where like you would really appreciate that, because I read Icon and Rocket, I know that specific scene, and seeing and hear that further connects it together. I think that's what originally was going in my mind, other than obviously the deadline thing. But it
was fun, like just sitting there and trying to figure out which book was that panel
exactly
from.
Yeah, because like obviously this stuff is like very notable, seeing his work, and then like several other artists and other books. So yeah, I think that was the kind of premise behind of why we did that specifically.
On Frustrated Sands and the creation of new characters of the future of Milestone. Evan, who's this character over here to the right?
Let's see.
What can you tell us about it without?
Huh? Yeah, that's a character who was very important to this story. And the only thing I'll say about that is that if you're an old school Milestone fan, you may have seen this character before in a different light.
You got to throw me a bone here. He's at least an antagonist, you would say?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Paul, you gonna lose some Milestone points.
What?
Milestone bucks. Yeah.
OG reference.
I'm not. I don't want to spoil anything.
Okay.
But
yeah,
it's safe to say he's an antagonist in the story.
Yeah, he's an antagonist in the story. And two frustrated fans point about the creation of new characters. Like Charles did his thing and slid a couple of new ones in here too. They don't get a lot of screen time or lines, but like he's definitely adding to the population of bank babies that are out there. And he texted me. He's like, "Hey, you call out 2 characters here. Do you have anybody in mind?" I'm like, "Nope, do you?" And he sure as hell did. You can see one of them next to our antagonist character on the panel on the right, with the mohawk and whatnot. And I want to know that dude's story.
We're getting a little bit into that in a second, but you mentioned old school Milestone. I did see the introduction of these 2 characters, the tiger guy and the snake guy.
Yeah, and that's all we're going to say about that. You got to move on, Paul.
I know, yeah. It's like
this book's out 2 weeks. What are you doing? You're just flexing the fact that you got to look at this early, and respect.
No. I'm pointing out the fact that if you've watched the original episodes, you'll recognize these 2 characters that pop up in the book. I'm not giving any context of what they're doing or what they're, but you'll see some familiar characters. But you mentioned some new characters. What can you tell us, without giving too much away, about these new characters?
All I can say is that they're all Charles.
Well, okay, I'll just except for the one with the horns. Obviously, like I think it was mentioned in like a previous issues. I think we changed the name up, but it was known as like Devil Kid. But I won't talk about that too much. I'll just say that with the designs that I did with the young woman with the purple treads and the kind of techish armor, and then the young man with I'll just say a fin, not an actual mohawk, but a fin on his head. I have backstories in my head. I just thought about, this would be cool to have this character. And if someone is so inclined who reads this book, so, those who are listening, get this issue when it comes out. And if you like these characters, hey, start writing about it, because I have some thoughts. I have some ideas that would be cool to go in, other than the cool design. Because what I like about superheroes that become popular, you always know the ones that really look cool, they ultimately have a really good backstory behind them.
Look, let me tell you, this character in the middle with the purple locks and the headpiece, that's a whole vibe. That's a whole story right there. I don't know about her backstory, but
I already have.
I want to.
We'll see. We'll see.
I want to.
Comes to fruition.
Can you at least? No, I don't want to ask that. I don't want to ask that question. Let's talk about the future of Anansi. What is it? Do any of you know the future of Anansi at DC Comics or Milestone? Now, before you answer, future-wise, we have this representation of Anansi as Aunt Nancy in one of the Future State stories, and most recently, DC has a webtoon series with Vixen called Vixen NYC, which is going to be released into an actual trade paperback soon, I believe. But those are like the 2 most recent instances of Anansi, other than the book that you all just did. Do you have any future plans for this character, or do you know of any future plans for this character?
We're both freelancers, so we don't know.
Pay grade. That's my answer. Above my pay grade for it.
Yeah, obviously, and I hate to give like a kind of rote comic book interview answer, but like, if people buy this book and respond to our version of this character, hopefully we'll be able to see him again. But I will say 2 things. One, with regard to Charles's characters that he dreamed up for this issue, that's an example of one of the things I like about legacy superhero storytelling, which is that it's collaborative in the aggregate, right? Like, a character who appears in the background of a panel may become a major linchpin in the storyline years, decades down the line, right? And that's just because somebody was inspired, that the creative spark came out of them in a particular way that grabbed other people, and other people want to play with the creation. That's one of the things that's great about this medium, at least the superhero genre. So that's one. And 2, Anansi's a folkloric character. He's a character of legend, right? And not unlike Thor existed way before Marvel Comics' iteration of him, right? The same thing with Hercules and other characters from mythology. So, the fact that Aunt Nancy was in the Future State book. I'm pretty sure it was Future State Wonder Woman in some of the new stories. So. Yeah, and will then show up in the Vixen book coming out like late summer, early fall. That just shows the strength of these concepts, right? Historically, a weaver of stories, a trickster, somebody who tells you the truth in a way you're not necessarily ready to receive it. I hope we keep on hitting different manifestations of this, African folkloric character, because that just elevates it to the point where all the systemic anti-Black racism that many of us have grown up with, that tell us that wants to devalue or de-emphasize our African roots, like the fact that this character can be manifested in lots of different ways means that those stories continue, and the connections to our shared past and our cultural heritage continues. So while I can't directly answer the question, Paul, I just hope it's more.
I think you did directly answer the question in the ways that mattered, if that makes sense. To that point, it is important, and I say this after every interview, that all of you, if you are intrigued by the concept, I've had the opportunity to read this book. This is a dope book. Not just from a collecting standpoint, if you're a fan of Static, I think it's an important book because, just me personally, I think Anansi is a very important folklore character. And to have that represented in a comic book, and not just represented in a comic book, but represented in the manner that these two men have done, is wonderful. I really hope that this book does well. I hope you all buy this book so that they'll both have an opportunity to I'm getting to understand Evan Narcisse. This man has stories upon stories upon stories in his head. He's not going to tell you, but he's got stories in his head, and I'd like to see them manifest. So let's make sure we buy this book and let those stories come to light. Before we go, I wanted to know, do you guys have any other upcoming projects that you'd like to talk about or can share?
Well, I know for myself, nothing that is, obviously there's this coming out, so keep this on the lookout. That'll be my first thing. And then obviously the Static one shot. But I also have another series that I'm working on that's not with any publishers, but it's being self-published, called The Shadow Agency, that I'm working with an artist. And basically imagine like BPRD Hellboy, but with Black characters. So, and yeah, I think the storyline is pretty fun. So we're working on that second issue. And then I have another series called Scrap, which deals with MMA fighting and centralizes on a Black teenager who's, finding her way deep long into the world of MMA and just making friends along the way. So kind of almost Street Fighter-esque, some power-esque elements involved. And yeah, we're working on the 6th issue for that coming out soon as well. So that's on my end. That's
what's up. What about you, Evan? You've always you're like a typical Caribbean brother. You got like 5 jobs going on all the time. You're always working hard on something. So what can you share with us?
Nothing announced, nothing that I can talk about just yet. There are some pots on the back burners that maybe we'll move to the front burners later this year. And my day job is working at Brassline Entertainment as senior writer, helping bring a really dope-ass video game to life. And that's all I can say about that. So, if we're all lucky, you'll be button mashing to this thing when the time is right.
I did have a side question for you, though, Evan. One of the last books that you completed was that the Batman Gothic Nights Gilded City, which you and I talked about before.
Yeah.
Subsequent to that, Jamal Campbell worked on a book where he introduced his character.
Have you seen your tweets, Paul? I know where you're going, but please continue.
Marilyn Moon Knight. You're making me sound very predictable. But look, I'd be remiss and I'd be kicking myself later if I didn't take this opportunity to ask you flat out if there's any possibility we could have the two of those characters, Runaway and Marilyn Moon Knight, meet up in some type of story, because their backstories, with both of them having history dating back to the origins of Metropolis and Gotham, I think would make for a really dope team up.
Would you say it would make for a world's finest team up?
You're now you're just trolling me.
Yeah, no. The honest truth of it is I have nothing to share about that, right? I'd love to be able to touch the Runaway again, and explore more with that character. On one hand, you don't want to do the predictable thing of like, okay, here's two black characters in a certain moment in history they have to meet, but I'd love to be able to figure out a way to tell an interesting story, a compelling story with those two characters, highlighting the things they have in common and things that make them different. So, if the powers that be at DC see fit to let a brother play with more toys, I'd probably be really happy to do that if schedule permits. But, part of what you guys do here at BCL is highlight characters who are deserving of audience. And, I just hope that I'm able to give whatever talent and energy I have to new characters, old characters, and entertain people and bring people into this wild and fascinating world of superhero comics. Like it Milestone made me, and all these other comics I've read and enjoyed made me. And I hope I just want to put more of that same energy out for other people. Now that I got a shot at that.
That's what's up. Well, look, I wanted to thank both of you all for being here. Just to thank all the fans who have been watching us all this time. We've got some other things coming up I'd like to share with everybody. On Sunday, we'll be interviewing Ken Quattro, the writer and historian of the very significant book Invisible Men, which talks about the history of some of the earliest pioneers of Black comic book creators. That's going to be a really dope discussion. We're going to focus on Matt Baker in that discussion. We also have our recurring lives on Wakanda Whiskey and Blur Them, usually in this time slot on Friday. I mean, I'm not used to being, not without a glass of whiskey on my Friday time slot, but this interview took precedence. And the Real Talk with Rich on Sundays, and our Ladies' Lives every month. And we've got a number of recent specials, which I hope you all check out on our YouTube channel. We've been really blessed with the opportunity to interview some really spectacular artists. So check out their works. So with that, gentlemen, I wanted to thank you for your time. Charles, you're new here. We have a tradition here at the Black Comic Lords. Whenever we interview somebody, we view you as family. So we like you to look into the camera and say your name and say, "I'm a Black Comic Lord."
My name is Charles Stewart III, and I am a Black comic book lord.
You have been initiated, sir.
All right.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you again for your time. And thank you all for watching. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.